Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Poles. I work for the USGS and the Pacific Northwest Aquatic Monitoring Partnership, or PNAMP for short, and I am the staff lead for the PNAMP IMW Forum. So I'm really excited about today's meeting. As you can see from the agenda, we're going to spend most of the meeting talking about the IMW management application synthesis, but we do have about 15 minutes at the end to talk about IMW fact sheets and the possibility of collaborating on a NOAA web story. But first, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time getting to know you guys. So if you'll humor me, open the Mentimeter poll by either scanning the QR code with your phone or clicking the link that Meg's going to drop in the chat. And we're going to start with an easy question. At least I think it's easy. Maybe you'll find it difficult. Maybe it changes depending on the day. If you're new to QR codes, don't take a picture. If you just aim your camera, a link should pop up. All right, so the first question is, would you rather talk like Yoda or Darth Vader? I was inspired by Star Wars Day when I was putting this presentation together, hence the fun question. All right, I see results rolling in. I'm gonna go ahead and see what we have. Whoa, it's close. I wasn't sure what to expect. I've used this once before, and last time it was overwhelmingly in favor of Yoda. But now we've got a tie. We have a tiebreaker out there. I don't know how many people. Oh, there we go. Yoda's pulling ahead. Okay. So I'm gonna keep moving. So if folks just joined, we are doing a Mentimeter poll, and you can find that link in the meeting chat if you're able to get to the chat. So the next question I have for you is about your IMW role. And so you might fit into more than one role, and if you do, just pick the one that you spend the most time doing. And this will just help kind of give us a better feel for our audience. That's always helpful to know who we're talking to. And I'm sorry for the folks that are on the phone. We don't have too many people on the phone, so I think most of you should have access to the polls through a phone or through your computer. It looks like the vast majority of people on the call today are monitoring practitioners, but we have a couple in each category, or at least one. Just one more second. And then we're going to do some additional polling later on in the meeting. So if you just want to leave that window open for voting, and we're going to come back to that later. Right, so the last thing I want to do, let's get back to my slides. And I just want to do real quick introductions in the chat. So hopefully you have access to the chat, and if you do, if you would just take 20 seconds to introduce yourself with your name, affiliation, and then the IMW that you spend the most time in for either work or play. I'll do that as well. All right. Seeing some folks introducing themselves, and I'd say lots and lots of familiar names. I think I've known everybody so far. Lots of friendly folks. All right. Let me see. Back to my chat. We have pretty good representation from around Pacific Northwest, it looks like. Again, a couple people from most IMWs. All right, excellent. All right, well, thanks for doing that. All right, so with that done, I am going to, actually remind you first that you should feel free to ask questions as we go along. So you can either put those in the chat or you can ask them out loud. We want this to be interactive. We're not going to ask you to hold questions till the end unless it seems like we're running out of time. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to John Foltz, the Executive Director for the Snake River Salmon Recovery Board, to get us started.
Great, thanks, Amy. Just really quickly check my sound. Is that all right?
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to kick off this presentation here today. I'm going to be relying on some of the rest of our team here to help me with this, but I'm going to kick it off here. So I'm going to walk through kind of this management applications from Pacific Northwest IMW's workshop effort here. I'm just going to go through a little bit of the background, the goals, who this is, the process and the timeline, the deliverables, why we're considering doing this and why it might be important, and get into some questions and feedback and next steps from you all. I just wanted to note that we just secured funding for this effort and wanted to thank PSMSC and the GSRO for their support of this effort, and also for Bob Bildy's time, and then also PNAMP as they help support this as we move forward. Can I get the next slide, please, Amy? So following a Governor Salmon Recovery Office, Recreation and Conservation Office hosted IMW workshop back in November, we were really beginning to get into some great discussion and lessons learned as specifically applied to restoration efforts or management. And just because of the remote nature of the meeting, originally we were meant to be in person, but limited due to the pandemic restrictions, we just didn't quite have enough time to get into some of the conversation there. And the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board and our recovery region decided that, hey, we'd like to continue some of this conversation. Had some conversation at the Salmon Recovery Funding Board level, and with some general support, we worked to develop a follow-up effort to take a deeper dive into the management applications of IMWs. We since developed a set of draft questions to help address these bigger picture needs that we hope help us answer overarching questions about how program managers and funders can better implement restoration programs to support salmon recovery goals, as well as specific actions we can take based upon IMW study results. This includes questions relating to how we can improve effectiveness of implementation efforts and restoration programs, and how we can effectively communicate some of this data and results. We've got a great opportunity here with the IMWs in the Northwest, and we've heard many times that we might not get this opportunity again. So let's make the most out of what we've learned so far to identify and define specific future monitoring needs as our monitoring resources continue to get tighter. Next slide, please. So we'll cut right to the chase here. We developed this scope of work and put forth these goals and objectives. And our goal here is to help salmon recovery regions, lead entities, and habitat restoration practitioners apply and convey to stakeholders what we're learning from the IMW system to habitat conservation and restoration work. What are we actually going to do? Specifically, the objectives here are to do some outreach to IMW watersheds, the PIs and associated restoration practitioners across the Pacific Northwest to identify management applications from individual study systems. Amelia, in a little bit, will talk a little bit more detail about what that actually means. Number two here, our number two objective is to develop a high-level fact sheet synthesizing management application take-home messages to salmon recovery and habitat restoration programs. And then the third objective would be to identify next steps to continue the conversation, synthesis, and outreach of IMW work, and determine interest and feasibility for the development of peer-reviewed publications for IMW management applications, kind of outside of this particular scope of work, but kind of setting the stage for that sort of thing. And we're really seeking to help with outreach and communication of good information to both project implementers, managers, and funders here. We're aware of the great published reports and want to get the word out and really focus in on application. Being able to engage with those that use the information from the IMWs is very helpful as monitoring efforts move forward into the synthesis stage of data collection from the IMWs. We know that all these things are publishable. There's some hesitation about communicating some of the things that we think we're seeing or some anecdotal evidence. Even if they're not statistically significant or publishable, they're still important to share and discuss. And some of these, some of this stuff, going back to that November workshop, is really interesting. And, when you get a group of folks together like we have here, advancing the conversation helps us hone in, and also we can share ideas that maybe we didn't think were that important at the onset, but as others are seeing similar things or have similar questions, it might help us go in the same direction moving forward as we get into the synthesis and the communication of this stuff. From a regional recovery perspective, we need all the help and insight we can get to make progress towards recovery. I think that's kind of the impetus for the recovery regions here. We're relying on the IMWs to help answer and inform, the question, are habitat restoration efforts successful at generating desired fish population responses? And I hope we can get through really to that point through this effort here. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Amelia to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. Thanks.
Thanks, John. That was a great overview. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
So who's involved in this project? You've already heard from John and Amy, and there's also me. For those that don't know me, I'm Amelia Johnson with the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board, and then we're also going to be hearing later on from Bob Bilby, who's with the Washington Governor's Salmon Recovery Office Monitoring Committee. So we'll be making up the core team for this management applications project. In terms of what we're going to be doing, Amy is going to be the main point person if anyone has general questions or comments, especially after we get out of this workshop today and you think of things that you want to follow up with, please reach out to Amy. And I think Amy's got her email at the end of our presentation slides today. And if you got here, you probably have her email already. And then Bob and John and I are going to be more working on refining the survey questions that we're going to send out to folks, and then synthesizing those responses and major take-home messages at the end of the project. And who we're trying to reach today is really that broader stakeholder community for the IMW programs across the Pacific Northwest. So all the monitoring folks out there, as well as the habitat restoration implementers and designers, as well as the more broader policymakers and funders related to these programs. So those that are looking for the end results out of the IMWs, and then what we call the data end users, which is more what John and I see ourselves as Salmon Recovery Office folks. So those are trying to draw conclusions from the IMWs or use the conclusions that you folks are putting together to change how we're implementing our salmon recovery plans and just being the most effective in our work. Next slide, please, Amy. So in terms of the project process for this, it's a pretty short turnaround we're looking at. So we're meeting today in May, and we're hoping to wrap up this project by January of next year. I see now that I wrote January 2021, but that's January 2022. So about 7 months or 8 months we're looking at here. And we've divided this into sort of 4 major tasks. The first one being that we're going to be surveying all of the IMW teams and then getting responses back from folks. So by the end of this week, you'll hopefully see in your inboxes some draft survey questions. And what we're looking for is, if you have the time and interest, any sort of feedback on those draft questions will help us finalize those, because that's really going to drive the bulk of this project. We want to make sure we're asking everybody the right questions, because that's going to inform what we're talking about at the workshops and those take-home messages we want to develop. So end of this week, you'll see the draft questions, and then we'll be sending out the finalized questions to everyone the beginning of June, and then you'll have about 2 months, so to the end of July, to work with your teams to answer those questions and send them back in. The next step will be actually synthesizing all of those survey responses that we receive and sharing that information back out. So trying to look at where we're seeing similarities in responses across the participating IMWs, but also where there's some contrast. So where folks are seeing different patterns or no patterns at all, we want to draw attention to that as well. And that's really going to inform what we're going to talk about in the fall, either in October or November. And Amy's going to pull up another poll to look at best timing for everyone to participate. But we'll be hosting a series of virtual workshops where we'll be going over those synthesized survey responses and identifying major take-home messages based on those. So what can we take from what we've learned so far in the IMW study systems and think about how to use that on the ground for habitat implementation and recovery planning purposes. And then in addition to the workshop discussions, we're going to also develop these fact sheets. So after this project's complete, we'll all have something to draw on with these major take-home messages that we can use for our planning and managing efforts. Next slide, please. So just to help everyone get an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the survey questions and take-home messages, we've got a couple up here. And for those that filled out the Washington GSRO questions, a lot of these will look pretty similar, but some of the things we're trying to look at is what can we say today about how fish populations are responding or not responding to habitat treatment work in the IMWs, and also just general life history information. So what are we learning about fish that we didn't already know? So have fish populations responded to habitat improvements to date in your IMW study systems? And then describe those responses and why or why not you think you're observing these. And then what can we say about the scale of salmon or steelhead recovery, as well as the scale of restoration needed in order to observe different fish responses? So this will be really helpful for us thinking about where do we apply these results, or there are systems where we need to make sure we can have a large scale treatment effort similar to the IMW studies, or are there potential different smaller scales we could work on as well? And then in terms of take home messages, where we are trying to capture what we can say about drivers of potential habitat responses to treatment. So these are examples out of the Asotin workshop that John mentioned that was held the other month. And one of the take-home messages they've identified for that IMW is that habitat responses are really flow dependent, not time dependent. And so this is really important to understand when we're looking at why we may not be seeing changes on the ground from treatment implementation. And then also how fish may or not be responding to different types of treatment. So again, this is one out of the Asotin, but they've noticed that steelhead juvenile production has increased about 20 to 50% in response to in-channel habitat restoration. But when they look at floodplain reconnection work, they're seeing a much larger increase in terms of juvenile production, so over 170% in the Bridge Creek IMW. So these are patterns, hopefully, that we could think about how to apply to other systems where they're looking at habitat restoration focused on steelhead. And then I think I'm going to turn this over back to Amy.
All right, thanks, Amelia. So just to sort of reiterate, I feel like Amelia touched on most of these, but there'll be sort of 3 products that result from the effort. The first is that document that will compile the questionnaire responses with a short synthesis on similarities and differences. And this is going to be that basis for the workshop discussions. And we'll send that out to review in advance of the workshop. Then there'll be a workshop series summary, and it's mainly going to be just like a bulleted list of recommendations and take-home messages. And then the last product will be that 2-page fact sheet. And the goal with the fact sheet is that it's engaging, it's easy to digest, focused on take-home messages from those workshops, the target audience being the general public, and then salmon recovery and natural resource management communities. All right, so I think it's now over to Bob to talk about, why this effort is important.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm essentially going to reiterate some points that John and Amelia have already made. But in terms of why we think this effort really has some importance or is timely, I think we would all agree that IMWs are an important element of a full integrated monitoring program. And now clearly the IMWs should be coordinated with the other monitoring types, project level effectiveness monitoring, validation monitoring. But when you've got all the pieces coordinated, the system can generate information to inform management decisions much more effectively than if these things are being done piecemeal. Now, the IMWs are a critical component of any monitoring program simply because it is the only way that we currently have to do a full assessment of the effect a restoration program has on the entire productivity of that fish from egg through smolt. The kinds of information you can get out of the IMWs, like survival rates, like growth rates, are demographic parameters that are very hard to obtain using other kinds of monitoring techniques. Emphasizing this, communicating this to the broader audience out there, I think is really one of the benefits we see from doing this particular project. The other goal, objective of this project, and I think probably this has come across loud and clear already, is that we have had IMWs in operation across the region for the last about 20 years. They go back to about the time when when the salmon were first listed in the Pacific Northwest. Those IMWs over time have generated a massive amount of information, some of it really valuable in terms of informing our restoration strategies. However, we haven't done a particularly good job of synthesizing that information, compiling that information across all the IMWs, and then trying to interpret that data in a way that really informs the way that we are implementing restoration on the ground. This project is one attempt to actually make some progress against that objective, to generate meaningful management recommendations out of the work that has been done to date. Now, the value of IMWs, I think, is actually, or this process also gives us, I think, the chance to begin to have a broader regional discussion about the value of IMWs going forward. Now, to date, IMWs have largely been viewed as sort of single-time experiments, right? We're going to go out, expend all this money, effort, and 20 years of research to answer the question, does wood placement have a positive effect on fish? Valuable as a valuable result, certainly. But when you take a look at the amount of resources that have been invested in these IMWs, I think it may be wise for us to have a discussion going forward whether or not we should actually view a subset of these IMWs as sort of restoration science laboratories. Locations where we have the opportunity as new restoration technologies arise to apply those new techniques and fairly rapidly generate some understanding as to whether or not that new technique is really effective. If every time a new restoration approach arose, we had to start from scratch, collect 10 to 15 years of pre-treatment information, and then apply the treatment and collect another 10 to 15 years, it would be a very slow and painful process, and one that I don't think funders of this kind of work have much appetite for. But in fact, if there were a subset of these IMWs where we felt that we could test restoration strategies sequentially going forward, then it may be really valuable to have that discussion about which of these we want to retain long term. So just as a wrap up, we see this as an opportunity to do two things. One is to make optimum use of the information that's been generated by the IMWs to date, and the other is to have a discussion about the ongoing value of IMWs and how we want to use IMWs to inform, adaptively manage our restoration programs going forward. Amy, back to you.
Okay, sorry. It takes a while for that mute to unmute. All right, so thanks, Bob. That was great. I guess we're gonna open it up for a discussion here in a second. But I first wanted to acknowledge the entities contributing funds and staff time to make this happen. But ultimately, it's going to be a group effort, and we're going to rely on your participation as well. And I think the more folks we can get to participate, the more impactful the effort will be. So thanks to our funders, and thanks in advance to all of you that are going to be filling out the questionnaire and attending the workshops. All right, so with that, yeah, we would love to hear from you guys. Do you have any questions or comments or concerns about anything you've heard related to this management application synthesis we're proposing? And you can either put that in the chat, or if you want, you can raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, you can just unmute yourself and speak up. See, I see Ken Fetcho. You want to unmute yourself? Ask your question.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks. It's Ken Fetcho, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and help participate in the Middle Fork John Day River IMW. We received the IMW funding from PSNFC and then distributed it to the 3 entities doing the monitoring, which is ODF&W, the North Fork John Day Watershed Council, and the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. So my question is, I guess just how the folks in this meeting may not be the right ones that you need to answer your survey. And so I'm just interested in, I think what you're hoping to do is builds on the compilation that had occurred in the past. But if you're not asking the right people those questions, you may not actually get what you're looking for. And so I'm just concerned that your sample size, sort of your audience, and who you're targeting to answer this in this tight timeline could be challenging. So, if you guys have given any thoughts to that?
Yeah, so this is Amy. I'll take first stab at answering that. So yeah, it's hard to know who's going to show up for a meeting. I didn't require RSVPs today, so maybe not everybody is here today, obviously. But I have a strong signal from all the Washington IMWs that they do intend to participate. And then I have it sounds like the Middle Fork, from talking to you and Casey, you guys seem interested in participating. I believe I know Tim Copeland's on the line. We've got some other folks from both of the Idaho IMWs, and I believe they're game, but I wouldn't mind hearing from them today, confirming or one way or the other. And then we are missing the pudding. I don't think anyone from the pudding is on the call, so I'm gonna probably follow up with them individually. So I feel like even though people aren't here today, I have a fairly strong signal that the majority of IMWs do intend to participate. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, Amy, John here. And maybe just to follow up to Ken's question, are you meaning just the folks here today, Ken, or are you meaning kind of the science data monitoring related questions as compared to like habitat restoration components?
Yeah. So I guess, Mike, you want to get to the way I interpret what you're saying is you guys want to understand how the information is being applied. And so you kind of need the practitioners on that. And so in the example you gave in your example, forgive me, I'm having multiple thoughts. I'm trying to stitch this together. But the example in the survey question that you gave, I believe that information's already out there, right? And so I don't know if a survey is needed for that. Like that information, a lot of compilation information that you gave as an example that exists. So I'm not sure if a survey is needed for that. But if you want to understand how information from IMWs are currently being applied, you do need the restoration practitioners to describe that, because the folks doing the monitoring may have an indication of how that's happening, but more specifically, you could need the practitioners. And I know at least from the Middle Fork John Day River IMW, they're not on in this meeting now. And we're happy to do that outreach to help you. But those are just some thoughts that I was having as I was listening to your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think exactly what you said, the outreach to those who might be able to answer some of these questions will be key, and appreciate your support in that. And I think that'll be part of the survey question. So we do have the survey questions that we'd like to share, get feedback on, and then, in that request will be, if you're not the right person to answer these questions, would you please help us identify who is? And, to your point, if the questions have already been answered in some form or fashion, even just providing the reference or pulling out that would be really helpful, just so we kind of have it in one place. I guess going back to Bob's final kind of statement there, and how we plan to use this information might be relevant too. It's kind of an outreach sharing tool where, again, the reports are out there. They might just not be reviewed or highlighted or summarized in a brief enough fashion for some subgroups that we're looking to reach out to. Speaking for myself, in the recovery region, having what amounts to a bulleted list of a few key points is really helpful when we're articulating the value of monitoring and trying to seek additional monitoring resources and how it relates to restoration actions. When we're trying to support or solicit for funding, having those little bits and making sure that they're up to date, still true. Our interpretation of a report, I talk with Steve Bennett's on the line here, and running by what I think I heard with him in my regurgitation of a report ends up being pretty important, because sometimes the interpretation is incorrect, or a really brief summary of a lot of important details gets misunderstood by someone like myself, I guess. And so I want to make sure that that's kind of in one place, that we are having the right people respond to the questions and get it kind of synthesized into a really simplified fashion here, and the surfboards, having funding decisions on IMWs in Washington State. This has in part been informed by some of their questions, and I think just getting some real brief summary responses would be extremely helpful. So probably more than you wanted to know there, but thanks for that, Ken.
All right. Was there anything else, Ken, that you wanted to share?
No, I think that's helpful. I think you're right. There's a lot of information available. There's the what I thought was a bulleted list that the PNAMP put together for each IMW and organized in a way. And so it'd be interesting to see what you guys come up with and how that differs from existing information, and just see how it goes over time.
All right. Thanks, Ken. I see Steve Bennett has his hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I think this is somewhat related to Ken's comment. I guess I'll make just a statement first and then kind of add something to it. But I don't think it's ever a bad idea to summarize and synthesize current understanding. But every IMW is on a different trajectory and has a different level of completeness, and so it'd be pretty important to make sure you're kind of separating IMWs and the responses that they're seeing based on what they've actually had a chance to implement and just where they are in their experiment. But to be a bit of a Debbie Downer, I think one of the problems with a synthesis is that it somewhat is indicative of a lack of patience in the funding world, and I understand why they have a lack of patience, but there's been a pretty consistent response to past surveys that we don't have enough money to do analysis. So many IMWs are sitting on a mountain of data, And every year they're forced to do the best they can to synthesize and analyze that data to say, what they're learning. But the bottom line is that they could be sifting through that data for, a year or two to come. And nobody has ever, to my knowledge, sort of said, you're right, you guys don't have enough money to do analysis, and this is what we're going to do about it. So this synthesis is going to be fraught with a lack of completeness, and that just seems to me to be something that we need to deal with. Otherwise, the IMWs will eventually be shut down, and there'll just be a pile of data sitting in multiple places that people might be able to synthesize at some point, but somebody's going to have to get money and time to do that. So why not get the people that are working on these IMWs to do that rather than wait for somebody to go dig it out of a drawer somewhere? That's my one bitch session.
All right. I hear you. It is frustrating. Thanks for that feedback. Anybody want to respond to what Steve said?
Yeah, Amy, John here. Yeah, I think, part of this is that can be a useful message to Steve. I think, it's going to have to be the best available information we've got in this thing. Everyone's in different places. I think that's understood. But, we ran a pilot kind of proof of concept of this. Steve did the majority of the work on that for the SOT and IMW here in our region. And, I guess there was a brief summary, and we pulled a couple of those bullet points out just as examples, but there was kind of 4 pieces to that. It was, what are the management implications and applications here that we're seeing? And it kind of had to do with habitat, with fish response. And then it had to do, at the end with regard to what Steve just said. And it's, we need to continue to do data analysis, and we have work to do on the back end here to really get to the end of being able to communicate and articulate what we're seeing here. And that was one of the take-home messages that we presented in future management implications, right? I mean, if the part of the message is, here's what we have this mountain of data, it's useful, we're seeing good things, we just haven't had the time to do the analysis on it and conduct the outreach that we'd like to do. That should be one of the management implications that we can relay to people that have the ability to help influence and impact that. So that was one of the bullets, the take home of our kind of proof of concept with the SOT and IMW.
All right, thanks for that, John. Are there any other questions or comments or concerns that people want to share at this point?
Amy, this is Bob. I'll respond to Steve's concern. And I do agree with some of the things that he said. But Steve, what we're attempting to do here really isn't so much a synthesis and an analysis of the data that all you guys have gathered at the IMWs. What it is sort of a high-level look at whether or not there are any commonalities coming out of the IMWs. And I grant you that they're all designed differently, and many of them are looking at different kinds of restoration approaches in different geographies. But nonetheless, I think that it is possible that we can get pull some common understanding out of some of the results that we've seen to date. And also, this goes to your concern. I think by demonstrating that these IMWs are generating some management relevant results, it will help us gain continued funding for these things so we can get them across the finish line, so we can get everything analyzed and get those results reported both in the technical literature as well as translated into management relevant recommendations.
Thanks, Bob. All right. I think we might have time for one more question or comment, if there is one. All right, Ken.
Yeah, I guess my last suggestion might be that the survey be informed or the interpretation of existing information, right? I'm just looking at PNAMP's website where they have the lengthy documents that Kitty and Amy and Craig put together, and then there is the work that I believe George did with another contractor. I'm forgetting his name, right? And so the
That was George
maybe,
Pess.
yep. And the other gentleman that was a private
Tracy
contractor,
Hillman.
that Tracy Hillman, thank you so much. Like those are rich documents, right? And so I guess I'm concerned that the survey would rehash what already exists. And so how can this be value added? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And it's a worthy effort, and the goal that you have is very important, and also the potential outcomes to continue to support funding for these. So I don't want you to take this as criticism, but I'm just trying to figure out where's the value add. And so as long as you guys are looking at existing information that a lot of people worked hard to compile, and this additional effort that you guys want to do is done with some synchronization or incorporation and not done totally separate, that could be helpful. So that's my last suggestion.
Thanks, Ken. I know nobody likes redundancy. I completely agree. I'm not sure. I think John kind of spoke earlier about we don't want to misinterpret. So it's helpful to have the IMWs themselves weigh in on some of these questions. I know it's that information may exist somewhere out there, but I may or may not know where that is. I may or may not interpret it correctly as we're trying to really condense it down to short and sweet points. And I see Steve. All right, Steve, go ahead. I was going to wrap it up, but go ahead. What do you have to add?
Well, I just thought I should end on a more positive note. Maybe, maybe something to add to the survey would be, what more will we gain? And this is sort of goes to Bob's point about, some of these IMWs could be used for all sorts of things in the future, but even the basic questions that we would sort of originally have set out to answer, which is, why are we seeing these responses? Because that's really the important ingredient in able to extrapolate these results to other watersheds. Once you understand why you saw no survival gain, or you saw a decrease in growth, or whatever, it is going to inform and make the extrapolation easier and more likely to be successful. And then if we include what we can learn in the future, and really the most important one that I can think of off the top of my head is, you invested $1 million in restoration. How long before you have to go back and do more restoration? Because I think we all understand you can't fix most places with one treatment, and that we can't really answer without time. And so, or at least getting an idea of how long your restoration is, how much it's breaking down over time. So I think it would be an important part of this, not to just say, what have we learned now, but what are we going to learn in 1 more year or 5 more years or whatever, and why it's important. Anyway, that's
Good. All right, thanks for that, Steve. Okay, I think we should probably move on. If you if you have additional thoughts that you want to share, you should feel free to email those to me and Bob and John and Amelia, or you can just send them to me and I'll make sure the rest of the group gets them. I see there's some additional feedback in the chat, and that's great. And Ken, I see your suggestion for doing interviews. So yeah, we can consider that. And so I guess I have just a couple of questions for you in a Menti poll, and again, not everybody's here, but I still think it is worthwhile asking the folks that are here for your input. So I'm gonna pull up those questions. And so this is really for the folks that would be filling out the questionnaire, so the IMW teams. And it gets at how much time do you have to respond to the questionnaire. And so maybe you've closed your window. So how about I go back here for a second. So this is the same link and same QR code that we were using before. And that takes you to that question I just had, and I'm seeing responses roll in. And so, yeah, like we're hoping that we can use this information to help tailor the questionnaire. You know, the length of the questionnaire. We want to make sure that you have enough time to be thoughtful about your responses. So we don't want to give you too many questions, and we just want to make sure we're not asking for too much of your time. So thank you for that feedback. And then final question, oh no, there is one more question after this. The final question to do with the management application synthesis, and this is for everyone. So it's about the timing for the workshops and what's going to work best for your schedule. So at this point, we're going to assume 3 half-day virtual workshops, but you know that could change depending on how long the questionnaire ends up being, how many IMWs participate. But yeah, we're going to use this information to help narrow down the poll that we'll send in early August to pick exact dates. So I'm going to give that a second to get some responses from folks. It doesn't, I was going to say it doesn't seem like there's a clear winner, but it does seem like things are sort of leaning toward earlier rather than later. I mean, we would certainly avoid the end of November for sure because of the holidays. All right, so I think that's probably pretty much everybody who's going to vote. So thank you for that feedback. Coming back to the presentation quickly, next steps. So I guess if you're in the meeting today and that the meeting information was forwarded to you and you're interested in future communications about this management application synthesis or the PNAMP IMW forum in general, send me an email and I'll add you to the distribution. As Amelia said, by the end of this week, we are going to share with you that draft list of questions, and you'll have until May 31st to provide feedback. And if you have feedback kind of like Ken saying you should consider doing this as an interview instead of a questionnaire, I mean, we're asking for feedback from everyone, especially on the questions. If you are somebody who will be filling that out, if you have suggestions for how we might make that easiest for you, we're open to that. So you have until May 31st to provide that feedback. And then once we finalize the questions, we'll get those to the IMW teams no later than June 7th. And we're hoping to have all responses by the end of July. And then in early August, we will send a poll to vote for your preferred workshop dates. All right, so that wraps up our discussion of the management application synthesis. And I just have a couple more things to talk to you about quickly here and then the last 9 minutes. So just a quick update on the accomplishment reports, or fact sheets as I like to call them because it's easier to say. So they were last updated in 2017 for the Salmon Recovery Conference, and people were extremely interested in them. We bundled them together, printed over 50 copies, and they disappeared instantly. Not everybody who wanted one got one. So there's definitely interest in this information. Last May, we talked about updating them. Since the information is getting a little stale at this point, we've got 4 additional years of data, in some cases anyway. So we were going to distribute those at the 2021 Salmon Recovery Conference, but the IMW session that we proposed wasn't selected. So I've been looking for other opportunities in addition to the PNAMP IMW website to share these fact sheets. And I've been talking to Jenny Franks who is the PACSURF coordinator at NOAA about other possibilities. And she seems keen on figuring something out. And I'll get into a little more detail about that in a minute. But at the end of February, I surveyed folks to see if they plan to update their fact sheets and when they would be ready to share. And so those are those responses on the left of this slide. There are a handful of IMWs I didn't hear from. I mean, some of them, like 10 Mile, I don't think there's anybody working on that anymore, so that's no surprise there. But I do, some of these are active, and I would expect to hear back. So if you're part of one of the IMWs on my unknown list, and you know one way or the other if you plan to update your fact sheet, if you could let me know either in the chat or send me an email, that'd be helpful. The Middle Fork sent me their fact sheet a couple weeks ago, and so I updated that information on the PNAMP website. And I don't know, I might have time to just real quickly show you that. Let me pull that up. So all I did was I took the information on their fact sheet and I like copied and pasted it onto the website. I'm a little limited in fonts and layout and whatnot, but I still think it came out pretty nice. This iteration of the fact sheet was a little bit longer than the original ones we did. I think this one ended up being 4 pages, so there's a lot of information here, but I think it looks great. And then down at the bottom, there's a link to like a PDF version of the fact sheet, as well as some other links they felt were worth sharing, recent reports, and links to their website and whatnot. And then I just got contact information from them this morning, so I haven't gotten a chance to add that yet, but that would be added down here at the bottom as well. So I think that looks great. I would love to do this for the rest of the IMWs. So I think there's 14 on here maybe, and like I said, most of these show last updated in 2017. So it would be great to get some fresh information on the IMW website. All right. So I think that's all I was going to say about that. The last piece is the NOAA web story. So as I mentioned, I was looking for other venues for the fact sheets, and I started talking to Jenny Franks. And so she has offered to work with us to write a story that would be published to the NOAA website and could also be promoted through their social media accounts. And the focus of the story is negotiable, but Jenny and I were thinking that it would make sense to highlight the management application synthesis content and outcomes. Jenny and I would be spearheading the writing, but we would look to the IMW teams to review and provide feedback before it got published. And with this online format, it's going to allow us to link to other resources like the fact sheets and story maps and videos and whatever other content you have. So I do have one last poll just to see what you guys think about this idea. Pull that up. All right, so yeah, do you think that, I know you don't have a lot to go on, but yeah, does it seem, I think it seems like a good idea, but I just wanted to make sure other folks thought the same. I don't think it's going to be much of a lift for you all. I think most of that work is going to fall on Jenny and I, but we will look to you to help provide some of the content and pictures and that sort of thing. All right, so that everybody's in favor of that. Thanks, that's great. And I think that's it. We do have just a couple minutes if I was going to skip questions, but it seems like we might have time for questions. So I see a couple hands up. How about, I think Steve, you're at the top, so I think that means you raised your hand first. So you want to go first?
Did you say me, Steve Bennett?
Steve Bennett. Yep, sorry. I just
No,
called you
if
Steve.
I did, I didn't mean to have my hand up.
Oh, it's up from
Joe had-
earlier. Okay. All right. How about Joe Anderson? I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Regarding the fact sheets, so the question was whether or not we were willing to update them. I don't remember making one in the first place, so I'm kind of curious who was responsible for crafting those. Yeah.
Okay. So let me quickly double check. I'm like, do we have a Hood
I saw Hood
Canal?
Canal on your list there.
It's
Yeah.
on there. Okay. So somebody submitted it. I would have
Okay.
to dig back through my email to see who did that.
Okay. That's maybe we
yeah.
just sort of maybe that's just a sidebar, sort of just get coordinated on that. That's all.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll work with you to figure that out because I would love to see it updated. So
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, this is Keith. That may have been somebody in our shop, Chantel Kreider, who had worked with a number of the IMWs for those original fact sheets.
Okay. All right.
We could do some offline discussions. Thanks, though.
Sure. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments about fact sheets or the NOAA web story? All right. Whoa. Then I think it's a wrap. That's everything I have today. I guess maybe before I say goodbye, I'll pause and ask the rest of the core team if they had anything else they wanted to add.
Amy, Steve just commented, do you want to send out a standard format / content for fact sheets, or do we just use the version online?
Thanks, Meg. So I think so when we talked about this last, the feeling was nobody wanted to reinvent the wheel. They didn't really want to start over. People were kind of just in favor of taking the existing fact sheet and adding new information. So I would just, it's sort of up to you, Steve. I would say there's not a standard template. Other than, I guess, I mean, if you reuse the fact sheet you already have, there was sort of a template we built from. There are similar sections in each of them in terms of the elements that were covered. So I think if you just wanted to take your existing fact sheet and build from there, that works. If you want to completely start over, that's really up to you. And then Ken says that, I don't know, Ken, I don't see the link. I think you tried to drop a link for the fact sheet that the middle court developed.
I did, and then I couldn't find it, so I'm scrambling to get it right now. Sorry.
Okay, I was like, it's linked on the PNAMP website if you want to look at it there.
Yeah, and so it might help just to look at that, or just use those headers, Steve, that you could pull off the one that Amy just put into the the online version. Oh, there you go. Thanks. Sorry about that.
I'll drop this link. No problem. I'll drop that in there so you can take a look at that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a while. I was just wondering if maybe there's headings that would help with this synthesis more than whatever we had in the past. Maybe you guys could look, and the core group could look and go suggest one or two things that might be missing or better ways to organize it if you think it needs it. If not, yeah, we'll just use the format we had.
Okay. All right. We'll take a look at that and let you know.
Sounds good.
All right. And Keith's asking for a link to the recording. We will add, we've recorded today's meeting, and that's going to be posted to the PNAMP YouTube channel. And I will send a follow-up message to the distribution list, just kind of hitting the highlights from today and the recording link, and kind of talk briefly about next steps. So, all right.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, no problem, Keith. All right. So I think that is truly it for today. Thank you so much for your questions and your input. We're excited about the upcoming work. We hope you are too. We will be in touch soon. Have a great day.